Yes.
Okay. So, hello, I'm Skylar Schlander. This is Procea. I'll allow Reed and Jaden to introduce themselves as well.
Hey,
I'm Jaden.
Okay, so moving on, I'd first like to introduce you to the current fish market works. And do that, I'll be doing that from the supplier perspective as well as the restaurant owner perspective. So to begin, obviously, a fish has to be caught, and then from there, the fisherman sells it to the first fish seller. And from here, it gets kind of complicated for the fish market, specifically because one fish can be sold anywhere from just one time all the way up to 6 or 7 times. So what this causes is just a lot of confusion on where one fish can end up. There's a lot of different outlets for just one fish to go through in this one market. So it's sold and resold multiple times, as well as a lot of the people selling and reselling these fish are using fax machines to do this. And it's just a really inefficient market. So it's important to point out the timeline that this fish market takes. One fish could be caught and go to a restaurant. That could take about 72 hours. So it'd be 3 days before a fish actually makes it to a plate. So from a restaurant perspective, as I mentioned before, one fish in the market could end up in many different places. So one restaurant owner has to call a multitude of different suppliers. And when they're calling these suppliers, they have to figure out if they have the fish that they want, if they have the quantity of fish that they want, or what the quality of that fish is. So it really is an issue of trying to find sufficient orders. Another important point to point out is that when they're calling these different suppliers, it's not just one supplier. So when they receive shipments, they come in different orders. So you might have 4 or 5 different shipments coming in one day. And that becomes an issue because you don't know exactly when those shipments are going to be coming in. You don't know if your shipment is actually going to be making it in. And a chef already has a busy enough job trying to prepare food, let alone taking different orders throughout a day. So now let's go to the solution. And to bring up the solution, we're going to be talking about Procea and their platform. So Procea is a software as a service company, and what it does specifically is it connects those suppliers, which I talked about are the fishermen and the fish sellers, directly to the consumers. So how it does this is the suppliers post directly the fish that they have to Procea's platform. And so then from here, the consumer then goes in to Procea's platform and is able to see exactly what type of fish are there, the quality of the fish, and the quantity of fish available. And so this is all on one location they can do this at. So what this means is they don't need to call all the different suppliers that they have. And another important thing is that using Procea's platform, those fish sellers are able to take the fish and put them all into one place, which is Procea, which allows for Procea to not only check the quality of the fish, but allows them to bring the fish and put them into one shipment, which is a lot different than how it was being done previously. So another really important thing to point out with Procea is they're simplifying the supply chain. So using Procea's platform, they're allowed to get rid of a few of the steps, intermediate steps specifically in the supply chain. So it reduces from what was 8 possible intermediate steps down to 4, which is the fisherman, the first seller, then they put it onto Procea, and then it goes to the supplier. So what this really does, it allows them, one, to check the quality of the fish through Procea, and they have a grading scale of E+, E, A+, and then B is poor, so they can't sell poor fish. As well as it allows them to have a quicker supply of fish. So when you're doing this disintermediation process, what you're really doing is making a much faster and efficient system. And so what was 72 hours for one fish to go from the ocean to a plate, you can now see they operate specifically France and Switzerland and England. In France, you can get a fish in under 24 hours from the time it's caught. And then if you're in England, you can get it within 48 hours. So that really allows you not only to get the fish faster, but you can really ensure the quality of the fish. because over a 72-hour period, it can deteriorate from what you originally graded the fish at.
Okay. And then looking to the market size and opportunity in which Procea operates. So they operate within the fresh fish and seafood market, which globally is a $360 billion market. However, as Skylar just mentioned, currently they're operating primarily in France, as long as England and a few other countries. And so what we put as the addressable market for right now is Europe. We think they'd love to expand elsewhere further, but currently their addressable market is Europe. Europe has the fresh fish and seafood market in Europe is $71.5 billion. And then one thing that the presentation talked about is investors love billion-dollar markets and double-digit growth numbers. The fresh fish and seafood market does not have double-digit growth. It currently has for Europe as an expected annual growth rate over the next 5 years of just 0.83%. So it's a market that's not growing very rapidly. However, like a lot of the companies that we've already talked about, the main growth for Procea is going to come through increased penetration. So it's a very large industry. They're still a relatively small company, so they still have a great deal of growth that is possible through penetration. And then if we look farther down the road, the global market has a slightly more aggressive, not huge growth rate, but it has a growth rate of around 4%. So they'll continue to be able to grow through penetration throughout Europe. And then as they begin to mature in Europe, they'll be able to expand and penetrate into other markets globally. So this company still has a very long period of time where they'll be able to grow very aggressively. And then as we look at just some of the regulatory considerations in the market that they operate, since they currently are operating primarily in Europe, and since they're a software as a service, the main regulation they have to deal with is the GDPR, which is Europe's General Data Protection Regulation, which a lot of us have probably heard about. It's just basically a very vigorous, very vigorous regulation that has to do with protecting the data for individuals. And so it's nothing crazy. Every company that does anything online has to deal with that nowadays in Europe, but that is their primary regulation they have to consider.
So Procea's business model is based on its service offerings. And so the firm generates revenue on each transaction by applying a commission fee according to the level of service that's provided and the country of destination. And so this commission fee will obviously vary as the platform facilitates the management of customs facilities and bill collections and invoicing in foreign currencies and shipping to those locations as well. And so as shown by the graphic here, the customers using this service can be categorized into 6 distinct groups: fisherman, fishmonger, producer, and then through the app, we'll be reaching restaurants and hotels, fish sellers, and wholesalers. And while the revenue figures for Procea weren't readily available, by the end of 2018, the firm had recorded approximately 60,000 orders since its creation. Two of the really attractive aspects of Procea that many of its investors had touched on was its strong network effect, and then it's also got great GMV and unit economics. And so starting with network effect, the Procea's business model has a strong positive linear effect, which basically means that the value of a company's service increases for both new and existing users as more people use the service. So in Procea's market and platform, the aggregation of additional restaurants brings more revenue to fish merchants, and on the flip side of that coin, more fish merchants generates more value for restaurants and other businesses due to a better range of prices and availability and diversity in an already volatile market. So because of the strong network effect, Proxy has been labeled as by investors as highly defensible. Then moving on to its unit economics and gross merchandise volume. In the 4.5 years that Proxy has been operating, they've been able to establish like really high and outstanding gross merchandise volume. And it really established itself as like a strong business-to-business sales machine. And so in comparison to other young business-to-business companies, they have a great retention, engagement, and repeat use, which is really great to see. And this is due to the fact that Proxy's easy-to-use platform connects supply and demand in real time, which is really unique. And so the vertical integration that we see here, and its easy-to-use process will allow Proxy to upsell and cross-sell their services in the future, which should already increase their unit economics. So Proxy's competition and sustainable advantage. From our research, we found the 3 most notable firms that may eventually capture portions of the market, and that was Russia's Yorso, China's GFresh, and Switzerland's Interfish Market. So Yorso was founded in 2016 as well. It's headquartered in Russia. And it actually captured a lot of press in the beginning, probably more than Proxy. But they've been relatively quiet as of late, which has been interesting. And so it functions as a business-to-business platform, and they focus more on like the data and marketing analytics for firms in the seafood industry. And something to note here for Yorso is they tried to expand aggressively very quickly. And so that might be one of the reasons why we haven't really heard from them since 2018. GFresh is headquartered in the Asia Pacific region. They were founded in 2014, but then in 2018, Alibaba invested in GFresh, which essentially tripled their market coverage and distribution channels. So what's typical of a company that's moving a large amount of product like GFresh or like Alibaba would do is that it sometimes lacks the transparency or quality that high-end vendors would expect. The third competitor is Interfish Market, which is located in neighboring Switzerland. And they were the first business-to-business company to establish like a credit service on each of its transactions. But they are now more advertising as like a worldwide database for seafood producers. And so what sets Proxy apart from these 3 competitors is that they have a strong devotion to just simplifying the fishing industry and establishing layers of trust. It's one of the few platforms that recognizes and respects the space that it's in and its history. And so like the fishing industry, like Skylar said, it's not new, and it has like hundreds of years of history. And so in that history, the survival of the fishing industry has been dependent on face-to-face interactions and like meaningful relationships. And I mentioned how Yorso in the beginning tried to expand quickly, and that's not what Proxy is doing. They started local, they kept it small and intimate, and then they're starting to grow now from that base. And I think that's what has made Proxy such a success in digitalizing a historic market. So I'm going to mention some more innovative advantages that they have in the next slide. And I'll also be talking about their marketing and key partnerships. I'm sure Jaden's going to talk about this a little bit later about the funding history and where we're at now. But it's important to note right now that Proxy is in like a key growing stage. And so they're using a lot of the funding and money that they're getting to market their product. And it was interesting, 4 out of the 8 job listings that they had were posts related to the marketing and growth hacking tasks. And so they're really trying to grow and push that right now as they're looking to expand into Middle and Eastern Europe. The key partnership that has helped them tremendously in the beginning of their growing stage was partnering with Steph. And Steph was founded in 1920. It's like the first European specialist in cold logistics and has a local network in over 15 countries. Another key partnership that has also separated Proxy from from its competitors is its partnership with Drone Air, which is a French manufacturer of professional drones. And so over the past 2 years, Proxy has developed a prototype that's capable of fishing at sea and delivering the product directly to consumers through their Proxy platform. And it's really interesting because it's all powered by solar energy. It's fully operational to meet orders for whole fish, as you can see in the picture. And it does this by using radar technology to identify densely populated areas of fish and then captures them by line. And so this innovative product allows businesses to receive fish of unequaled freshness. I know Skylar talked about in France you could get it within 24 hours, but with this technology that can decrease to 12 hours. And so after several tests, Proxy's actually launched almost 100 drones to be available at strategic fishing ports in northern France, which is really exciting. And then the last marketing tool that I think is unique to Proxy is their collaborative, what they call hackathon contest, which they host annually. And it tasks teams of developers to create an app in 36 hours that solves problems related to the sea industry. And so this past year's winner was a fish recognition software based on artificial intelligence. And so this app was able to identify species of fish and then bring up information like state of stocks, reproduction period, and recipes. So Proxy, I could see Proxy easily using this event as like a marketing tool and as a future investment strategy once they have more free cash flow to invest.
We're talking a little bit about the executive team for Proxy. So right now there's 3 people on the executive team. First off is, and these are all people from France. Their names are a little bit difficult, so I might butcher them a little bit, but Renaud Angelbert. He's the co-founder and CEO. Currently he has 16 years of experience. So starting in 2016 was when Proxy came into play, but before that he was working specifically in companies that provide the supply chain in the French HOREC channel. And so what that means is the hotel, restaurant, and cafe channel. So that's really important to note because those are specifically the people that are the consumers for the French market. So he has a lot of really great relationships both on the supply side and the demand side for the fish market in France. The second executive is Florian. He was the co-founder with Renaud. He's also currently the chief sales officer. So he has a background in education from the University of Bordeaux, specifically in agricultural business. Along with Renaud, he also has a lot of experience in the industry, has 15 years of agricultural experience since he graduated. An important thing to note is that he's actually a childhood friend with Renaud, so they have a really good working relationship. It's allowed them to grow the company a lot easier than it might be for other companies. But with that being said, they don't have a lot of experience with building websites or any of the software engineering side of the business. So that's where Jerome Jolly came in. He was previously co-founder and CEO of a company known as Pix to Know. But he also has a lot of background specifically in software engineering. So the reason that he was hired onto the executive team was to become the chief production officer. And that happened in 2019. And that's really when you saw Proxy's website go from what it was to what it is now. It really became a more friendly user interface and allowed for companies to really utilize the product in a much more efficient way, as well as just a lot easier for those companies to know how to use the website versus what it was prior.
Okay. real quick, before we look at that, can we just all admit how cool it was to see a drone fishing? This is pretty awesome. But anyways, so just looking at its financial and funding history, so far the Procea has had 3 rounds of capital raising for, we found a few different estimations for how much they've raised in total, but it's somewhere between 10 and 11 million. So we went to estimate of 11.3 million. Their first round of funding was a seed funding in 2016, which raised just over $1 million. And then in 2018, they had an early venture capital raise of 2.7, and then a Series A in 2019 of 7.34 million. So compared to the last 2 companies that we just talked about, they haven't been raising billions of dollars. They're still a very young and high growth company. Through those 3 rounds, 9 minority venture capital investors have invested, and in the most recent Series A round, there were 4 VC funds that are specialized in marketplaces that invested. So part of that obviously was adding a capital to the mix, but also getting some expertise from some of these investors. And in their most recent valuation, it's kind of a wide valuation, admittedly, but they had a valuation somewhere between $29 and $43.5 million following the Series A valuation. And so that's just where they're at right now. We couldn't find any specific financial information. However, one of the investor funds is, I don't even know how to say that, Semepeta, whatever that, it's just an investor fund that is one of the ones that specializes in marketplaces. And as Reed already talked about, they just pointed out the fact that this company has very strong unit economics with a very strong gross merchandising volume, which is very similar to just top line of the revenue, and then strong user retention. And then we couldn't find, again, any specific information about how they've been impacted by the coronavirus, but needless to say, all their Twitter and Instagram and Facebook posts are all in French, and sometimes the translate doesn't make a ton of sense, but they've been talking about COVID-19 a lot. They seem like they're doing okay, but certainly, like most companies, have been impacted by it. So if we go to the next screen, we kind of made some of this up. So we went on some logical assumptions, but this is for what we were thinking about, what we would expect from their next round of funding. So expect the next round to be a Series B funding, just to follow up the Series A. We expect it to come in the next few years. They've pretty steadily done raises almost every year. We expect a little gap after the Series A, but in a few years to do a Series B round funding. And we think that a good amount to look for in this next raise is somewhere between $15 and $20 million of capital. And with the intention of trying to keep all investors as minor shareholders to still retain some equity within the company for even further on rounds. And so because of that, we saw this next round as a possible exit for some of the early seed and maybe even early venture capital investors. One thing we talked about earlier in class with some of the presentations is that most VC funds tend to prefer that their portfolio turns over every 5 to 8 years. And so some of those early investors during this next round of funding will be reaching that 5 to 8 year period. And so we'd like to see some of them exit so that we don't have to give up as much existing equity in the company, and we can just turn some of that to new investors. And then use of funds, something we talked about a little bit, the primary use we'd like to see is helping it just expand from France and Switzerland and England to more of Europe and capture more of that European market, primarily by increasing staff for sales, marketing, and product development. So as Reed talked about, a lot of the jobs for offering our marketing and sales, and we just like to see that increase so they can continue to grow. And just as most businesses in this sphere, when you're first starting, you got to build that user base to get that strong network effect before you can really start to see strong cash flow. So just continuing to build that base by continuing to receive funding. And then depending on how much they make in this next round, some secondary uses is potentially trying to expand outside of Europe and then continuing to develop some of the things Reed talked about, maybe putting more rigor into the drones to help catch more fish with drones or this hackathon events, but mainly focused on those primary uses. And then so to the final slide, just looking at an exit strategy. Overall, we think the exit is still a few years off. They're not looking for an immediate exit strategy. They're still in their fairly early stage of growth, and they still have a good amount of growth to go. But we looked at some competitors and maybe looking into like a merger or buyout down the road, and we couldn't see any that just made like a ton of sense. So we thought that as they continue to grow, the most likely end exit would be through an IPO. However, for some of the investors that have already been involved, of course, some exits for them would be, a Series B, Series C, Series D round funding would be an opportunity for some of those early investors to exit. But we do think down the road, an IPO is where this company is headed as they grow and mature. But we still think for the investors that are still investing at this point, it's still early enough that they should expect to see fairly substantial returns from this investment, ranging from the 30 times return on investment before we get to this final exit strategy. So that's all, folks.
Very well. What questions would you guys have to ask?
I would have a couple of questions. First of all, thanks guys for a really interesting presentation from the fish market. Great job. I have a two-part question, first about the suppliers and then about the drones. So you discussed briefly about the quality of the fish that Procea suppliers are supplying for customers. So I wanted to ask a little bit about that process, that how do they verify, for instance, legitimate suppliers that will supply fresh fish, and how does that process of validation go through with Procea?
Yeah, so an important thing to know, through the Procea software, they're uploading it to the software. Procea is then procuring the fish and shipping it through their services. So during that process, they get to actually look at the fish and certify the quality that the end consumer is getting.
Okay, gotcha. Nice, cool. And then about the drones, so you discussed about that they've started this process with drones fishing, which is but so how many drones do they have fishing right now, and what is the size going to be with the drone fishing, meaning that how much fish can they really catch with those drones?
Yeah, their drone fleet right now, they noted that they have 100 that are able to operate. They're only operating and doing that type of service in a specific port, I think just because of the types of fish that are in that area. But a cool thing about that service is that they're able to store the fish in like a specific compartment that has like a cooling effect. And so that also ensures quality of the fish as well. So they didn't really give any information in terms of when they're going to launch the drone into other locations. Yeah.
All right, but how are then suppliers thinking about this? Because then again, they're competing against their suppliers, which are their customers. So how are their suppliers then feeling about that Procea is fishing by their own?
Well, to that point, this is one of the reasons it was a secondary use for funds is because it is kind of a niche thing. This is never going to be Procea's sustained cash flow. Their cash flows through their primary service, and so it's not going to be such a big thing that it's pushing out the suppliers using the system. This is a fairly niche thing that's only going to be utilized by very like high-end restaurants who are trying to get, the absolute freshest, and there's going to be a high premium, but it's not their primary business, and it's not likely to crowd out the people using the business either.
And to go off of that, they're also using the drones through the proxy platform, and so they're still going through that software that they've created for that.
Okay, thank you.
So you guys said that a normal like transaction in terms of fisherman to dinner plate can take 72 hours and it can go through, 5 to 7 different people. How much with proxy, kind of a lot of those middlemen kind of get cut out. How much does that save for the restaurant and yeah?
Yeah, so they didn't provide a specific figure, but yeah, that is kind of a fish that goes through that many different intermediate steps. It's definitely going to have to be sold at a little margin. So it does, in effect, allow either proxy to take that the extra money, or it allows either the consumer to see some of that savings. They didn't say exactly what they do with that change in the margin, but it does create more efficient, so it is a little cheaper to get that fish from the ocean to a plate.
So Noah, looks like you've got your hand raised.
Yeah. I didn't notice. I mean, I love the presentation. I knew nothing about the fish market. Very interesting. Do you know if the supplier or the consumer pays for using proxy? I didn't notice that. Or is it both?
I believe that there's probably on both sides, just because it does connect both of them. But I think primarily it would mostly come from the consumer side, being able to locate fish a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the commission where it comes from. So through the purchases, through their website, they take the commission base off of the purchase from the consumer.
Okay, and also, is it location based? So you can only buy fish, within a few hundred miles of yourself?
They specifically operate in France, Switzerland, and England right now. So if you want your fish really quick, it still needs to be shipped. So if you're not close to the channels where the fish are actually caught, it will take longer. That's where the 48 hours kind of comes in.
Yeah.
So it will be shipped. So if you're really close to those channels where the fish are being caught, it's a lot quicker. They can get it to you within 24 hours.
Cool. Thank you.
I'm just not sure, like, are they paying fish and then to fisher and then selling it to restaurants and consumers, or are they an intermediate and taking fees on every transaction?
So I think to answer that question, they're taking those intermediate steps out. So it's goes from the fisherman to the seller, which is not part of proxy. Then it goes from the seller to proxy, where the consumer then purchases off of proxy's website. And so the commission base comes off of that purchase. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
I have a question. Are they looking forward to expand to different markets, like maybe to the U.S. or Latin America countries?
Oh, go for it, George.
Go ahead. No, you got to read.
This past summer, they were doing trial runs for other places in Europe, but they're mainly focused on hitting Europe first and establishing those relationships there before they even think about going over to the America or Latin America. Because a big part of Yorso's kind of downfall, Proxy's original competitor, was that right off the gate, they tried to get license and partnerships with people in Thailand and China and Honduras, and they weren't able to generate any revenue there or establish any meaningful relationships, which is a huge part of the fishing industry. And so I think Proxy's wary of doing that quickly, too quick at least.
Thank you.
So I'm trying to think about this a little bit from the investor standpoint for a minute, and I'm a little confused. Is this a company that is a online marketplace? Are they a wholesaler? Or are they trying to be a fishing company? And is their lack of focus an inhibitor on their growth and ability to raise money? What do you think?
Yeah, I think definitely it started off as a software company. They seem to be a little ambitious going into fishing with drones, which does kind of take away from the underlying what the business started off as. Yeah, so I think, yeah, from an investor standpoint, it does get a little confusing on what you're really purchasing. So I think going forward, it'd probably be smart for the company to stick specifically towards the software as a way to facilitate that wholesaling process. Yeah, I do see there is a lot of confusion and kind of they're getting a little inventive a little early on. It does seem to be like that.
And some of you know a little bit about my interest in drones through a company you know of as Element Technologies. And I'll tell you, I think they're getting a little bit more than a little inventive and a little ambitious. This may be flights of fancy. And from an investor standpoint, you know, would I want my investment dollar be going down that R&D drain?
Mm-hmm.
What other questions or comments, guys?
I do have one. I was wondering if, like, how much demand can Procea Proxy? How much demand can Proxy currently handle? Or, like, what would it take to scale it up?
That's a great question.
Hard, maybe.
Yeah, that's a great question. We weren't able to find exactly how much demand they can handle. I mean, one of the things, as Skylar talked about, they do verify each fish, so there is a certain demand restriction at this point. That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, okay.
Well, very good. Nicely done, guys. Let's go ahead and move into group 4. Oh, Jens, go ahead, please.
I have a final one, Rick. Thank you, guys. This was a very interesting presentation, so well done. Kind of coming up on Rick's question, I agree with him that the proxy drone is probably going to cost a lot of money in R&D, and that's not really something that you like as an investor. So on the other side of that, I was wondering if when they're looking at growth, are they looking at only adding restaurants, or are they looking to serve, like, for instance, supermarkets as well?
Yes, I think a part of their services, they're doing essentially both. They call them fishmongers, which is essentially kind of in that wholesale arena. So anyone can really purchase off the app. They're not really too picky on that side of the consumer. But yeah, it does kind of feed into there. They are seeing a lot more on the restaurant side right now, but it would be a potential to grow into that market.
That would be more interesting for me as an investor than the drones, but I mean, we all like the picture of the drone, so it's probably a great strategy for promotion, right?
That's right.
Yeah, that's about all it's good for. So,
yeah, we agree on that one, Rick.
Well,
hey, thank you, guys. Well done.
Yeah, nicely done.